Hey guys, you know we're fans of the In Search of Darkness documentary series, and now is your chance to order the upcoming film In Search of Darkness 1990 to 94. We have a link in the description of this episode. Check it out and order part 1 of the definitive 90s horror documentary today. All right, welcome back. My name is John, and this is the Dewey Pod Monster Podcast. This is the original podcast about consumption in 3D, no less. And with me this week is the host of the Dewey Pod Monster Podcast. His name is Sean. Sean, how are you doing today?
I thought of a new band name. I think I'm going to name them the Eyeball Poppin' Daddies.
I like it. So there's a couple popped out eyeballs in what we're about to talk about. So if you're not aware, today is Friday the 13th, and we are doing our thing that we do around here. We're talking about a Friday the 13th movie. And if you've been keeping track, we have worked our way up to Friday the 13th Part 3, or Part 3D. This movie is the, believe it or not, third movie in the Friday the 13th franchise.
You don't say.
I do. Do you want to go into the plot? And do we even need to do a plot review on this? I didn't pull a review on I guess I can pull a review real quick. Go ahead. Let's do a plot, because fuck it. We don't know what we're into yet.
There's this guy. His name is Jason Voorhees, and he stalks a group of friends who have just arrived to spend the weekend at a cabin near Crystal Lake. A little different this time.
You know what's funny about that? It's just supposed to be on the other side of the lake, and it's less than 24 hours after Part 2. Forget the fact that, Jason found a Fantastic Sam's to go get a makeover at between Part 2 and Part 3. I think the best part of this movie is that near the beginning, well, it's not the best part by any stretch, but an entertaining part of this movie is near the beginning. They're watching Friday the 13th Part 2 on the TV. So
Jason really beefed up between Part 2 and Part 3D here, I've noticed.
He sure did.
Hit the Planet Fitness.
Yeah, well, took some, got swole, and I don't know why this one doesn't want to pull. So fuck the third party review. We're going to just do our own review. Fuck it.
We'll do it live. Fuck it.
We'll do it live. Yeah, so this is the
fucking thing sucks.
This movie does not suck, actually. This is one of the, for me, this is one of the more entertaining movies out of the franchise. This is the first movie where, to me, this franchise really starts feeling like the Friday the 13th that we really know and love. It gets kind of campy, no pun intended. You finally get to see Jason looking like Jason. Coincidentally, which I didn't notice until this watching, at exactly 1 hour into the movie is when you see him first pop out in proper Jason garb. And unlike modern slashers or most modern slashers, you still, for the most part, can at least like most of these characters. They're not total pricks, at least. Some of them can be a little obnoxious, but they're not pricks. I wouldn't go that far.
Yeah, they're all fairly likable, like you said. I think the only one that I would take or leave, more than likely leave, is Shelly. Shelly's kind of a crappy dude, but he's actually even not that bad. And I think it's funny that this is 1982.
Yes.
And by 1982 standards, Shelly is fat. I think by today's standards, that's like me right now.
Yeah.
I aspire to be Shelly.
The thing about Shelly is, and we're going to just apparently go totally all out of sequence here, is he's a little obnoxious in this movie, but he's also kind of innocent and dumb in that sense. The problem with Shelly isn't so much that he's, what we just said. It's that you don't really get a good payoff on his death. You see him die, but you don't see him get, usually when you have the annoying character in a movie,
you're cheering for their death.
Yeah, and they get like the most fucked up or brutal or, whatever death, and his isn't that. It's kind of a off-screen attack that ends with a on-screen like bleh, but we'll get to that, I guess. So
let's step it back.
Right.
This takes place, like you said, within 24 hours of the finish of the previous movie, because the movie starts with them talking about on the police scanner or on the news or something about, some kids at the camp that have been slaughtered. And that's where we kind of start off, right? As they do. Yeah, we open with a convenience store and a guy that kind of looks like the dude from Bob's Burgers, kind of looks like a schluffy guy. And right off the bat, you're very aware that this is like prime 1982 3D. Like, this movie throws everything it possibly can at the camera. And I gotta say, like, the more I watch it, I kind of have a little bit of soft spot for that. Is it cheesy? Absolutely. Is it great filmmaking by today's standards?
Probably not. But watching it, I watched it 3 times this week because that's what kind of nerd I am. Like I said, I really like this one. It kind of leads to some different camera angles that you wouldn't see otherwise. It leads to some weird like hokiness, and it certainly scratches that nostalgia itch if you have any type of love for 1980s 3D, where everything was about coming right at you, because that's, how they did it at that point. There's so many shots, and the opening scene is almost entirely composed to this, where they don't really throw stuff at the camera. They just slowly move it towards the camera and leave it there for like a good 5 seconds to really get the red and blue effect.
And they do a lot of effects even outside of the 3D. I think you mentioned it. They do things that are kind of outside of what you would expect them to do in a Friday the 13th movie, like angles. There's a specific angle that I'm thinking of where the guy who walks on his hands all the time, there's a character that is always walking around.
Oh, we're going to come back to that.
They slice them, and there's just like an angle through the bottom of the floor, like a glass floor. But John, I want to ask you, what's your guess on how many 3D shots there are in this movie?
Do you have an actual answer for this?
I don't have an 100% actual answer, but from my count, give or take, I have a general, within like 2 or 3, I probably have, and depending on what you'd consider like an actual 3D shot, I have a good idea.
So for what I would consider to like intentional 3D shot, I'd probably say somewhere around 30 to 35.
You're pretty close. From my count, I counted 28 individual times, and I think I'm counting the popcorn a couple times. There's a popcorn scene where popcorn's flying up into the camera, because it's like there's a break. It shows popcorn, then it cuts away, then it cuts back to popcorn. 28 times. They utilized 3D to the fullest in this movie. They were full 1982 3D.
And this is one of the first really big 3D movies that came out. If I remember right, this is before Jaws came out in 3D. This is before, this was like not just the hype, but the kickoff of the 3D phase. Or this particular iteration of, because it seems like 3D comes around like every generation. Like we have a year where it's like, well, we're trying this again, for better or worse. And this was the first one that really did it. And really to this day, I think it's one of the ones that kind of pulled it off better, because you can find 3D cuts of this with the red and blue and all that, where it looks kind of weird and wonky. But even putting this in 2D, like, some of the stuff is unmistakable. There's, again, going back to the opening scene, you see a snake in New Jersey, of all places, like
on a wire,
on a wire
connected to its face.
Right, like jump out at you in seconds. You saw, like I already mentioned, the clothing line or whatever it was, that it's some kind of pole that he has that comes right at you. Even the first kill that you see, where Harold or Bob's Burgers gets the meat cleaver to the chest, which, let's be real, that's probably not even the worst thing that happened to this guy's heart in this movie, based off how he's eating in the first 10 minutes. These effects all are very much so played in a way that there's as much we're throwing shit at you as much as we possibly can. It's coming right in your face.
And to be fair, Paramount Pictures invested a lot of money into the 3D stuff that they would do, and down to the point of considering sending 3D lenses to theaters so they could show the movie accurately, and lawsuits that came because of, giving somebody the manufacturing rights to making the lenses. I mean, how much more 3D drama can you be? This movie was expected to be a bit of an usher of the 3D era, whatever time this was, the fourth generation 3D. We think of the 50s 3D movies, the smell-o-vision crap, and there was that dearth of 3D movies that kind of came out around the time of this, but this was really expected to be a big deal. So they definitely utilized that 3D-ness as much as they possibly could.
Well, I think that paid off for him. I mean, up until Freddy vs. Jason, this was the highest grossing movie in the franchise, and it's got a budget of about $2,500,000 roughly, and it made almost $37 million, which I don't know how you do that by multiply that by 2023 standards, but it's a pretty good return on investment.
And the other thing that I was kind of thinking of is that this movie, because of the 3D, it almost, and you alluded to it earlier when you mentioned that this is where we see the real Jason. Jason becomes the real Jason, the iconic Jason that you think of.
Yeah.
The movie has a real kind of tonal shift from part 1, part 2. It starts to usher in this different, and you mentioned it, more campy kind of fun era of Jason. He's not just the killing machine. Well, he's not really the killing machine in the first one, right? But it's it's not so serious. It kind of is played for a little bit of that dark humor, those dark laughs. There's not so much of the stalking. You see more of Jason in the background than you I don't know if you even see like a first person view this time around, but it's a little bit of a shift because the first two movies were so like they had that first person perspective on a lot of times when Jason or Pamela are the main like focal point of the scene.
Both 1 and 2, especially 1, obviously, because it's admittedly by the director and the creator a direct ripoff of Halloween, but both 1 and 2 feel like they're trying to go for the Halloween vibe, and 3 and kind of onward feels like Friday the 13th is trying to be Friday the 13th. Like they've
stepping out into their own.
Yeah, they've found their voice more or less. And I think it pays off because it's still got just as much, if not more, higher body count, kills, gore, etc., etc. I mean, this franchise has been notoriously like butchered by the MPAA, so it's not like they ever cut back on that, but they almost found a way to make each insane death almost humorous with how they presented it.
And a lot of it seems like with the kills, they're like we kind of mentioned with Shelley. We're going back a lot. We're going back to Shelley here.
Yeah,
it's off camera. Like a lot of the stuff seemingly in the first couple. I mean, they reuse the under the bed thing or the hammock, I guess in this case. They reuse that shot, but Shelley's off camera. There's a few that are kind of off camera. You don't really see, or even the shadows. You might see a scene in future movies where it's like a shadow, something's happening. You can imply what's happening, but this one seems like they have a little bit, they kind of hide it a little bit more just to fit the kind of vein of being a little bit more silly. And this is the first movie where it wasn't actually filmed on the East Coast as well, right? This was filmed on a soundstage. Yeah,
this was filmed in, part of it was.
A set.
The barn it might have just been torn down, or it was, so there's actually a cabin and a barn that were like an actual filming location that was in California. The house burned down. Or something around it got hit by lightning, fire, gone. Basically, I guess the only thing that still is left there, I've seen a bunch of filming location videos on it where the only thing really left is essentially the frame of the barn. Like the walls are still up, but that's pretty much it. And the fireplace is just, fireplace is probably not going to burn down, but it was
have to be really hot for that.
It'd be a pretty bad fireplace if it burned down, but most of it was filmed not necessarily on a stage, but on a set.
Yeah, and you can tell some of the scenes the backgrounds look a little shaky. They look a little like, I don't know about this. A little touch and go here for a few scenes. But my point being, it really takes this shift. It's trying to differentiate itself from those first two, even though this was initially intended to be a bit of a kind of end of a trilogy, right?
This was supposed to be the end of the franchise, which we know that's how that worked out.
Really? They have more of these?
This is the last one. A few.
Oh, shit.
Lucky for you.
I'm in for a treat.
The other thing that's really mentionable in this, and we're all over the fucking rails on this one, apparently. I'm like 10 minutes in. I think this has arguably the most underrated person to portray Jason in the entire film series. So Jason's played by Ricard Brooker in this one. They actually credit him as playing Jason like right out of the gate. Like after you see the Friday the 13th credits with, by the way, the best opening theme song, Suck It Halloween, Suck It Jaws. This theme song beats the shit out of both of you. Sorry, John Williams, your Star Wars shit can go right up your ass because this song is that good. It's right there. It's Ricard Brooker. And he really kind of, obviously other people play him throughout the majority of the run of these films, but he really kind of lays the groundwork for everything, like all the mannerisms and all the things we really like identify Jason as. It's all really borne by his performance in this character.
Well, I guess you mentioned the theme. That's another shift. This is the only movie that has the different kind of theme music.
Oh yeah.
And you're right, man. This is like, and not to discredit Jason or anything like that. I just want to touch, and this is probably my favorite version of a horror theme, probably of all time.
Fantastic.
Absolutely. I would buy this. I would rock out in my car to this any day of the week.
So I do rock out to my car to this. It's on my favorites list because it is on Spotify. And I can assure you that song will probably be peppered in at least at the beginning of this episode, if not in other places too. But yeah, that theme song is great because it really does set a tone for this. And again, this whole movie, we've said it several times now, it feels like almost a rebirth of the franchise, and we're only 2 movies in at this point.
Yeah, it's a weird, really early reimagining of a series. And just to mention some of the cast, the characters, I mean, there's nobody really that you would recognize, but we've got, rather than the kids, the counselors, it's just some normal everyday people that are in a cabin that are near Crystal Lake. We got Chris, we've got Debbie, We've got Fox, which it's different because this also takes some people that are outside of the main cast, meaning the bikers, which are Fox, Loco, and Ollie, which plays a little bit of a part because we have this person come in, we think that they're disposed of. I guess it's not too out of the question. In Ollie, who comes back to kind of save the day a little bit. I mean, if you could say that.
I want to talk about the bikers and how they reappear, because all three of them reappear in the movies. So let's hold that because we're so off track if we get to that. So let's kind of backtrack here. So we've already talked about how this opens. We get introduced to our main cast of characters, which is Shelly, Andy, Debbie, and Chris, she's the final girl, right?
Yeah, she's the main character. We've got, we have the guys. We have Rick, Shelly, and who's the other guy?
Andy.
Oh, Andy.
Andy's the handstand. And then you also have a very obvious Chong reference that's in the back of the bus or the back of the van, which is kind of entertaining. The two hippie stoners that are in there, you can 100% tell they put them in there because they're it would look cool in 3D? A bunch of smoke. That's got to be the only reason they're in there. These
hippies are the stereotypical 80s, early 80s idea of what a hippie is. Like you said, Cheech and Chong, totally. And the female, the woman, doesn't really fit the mold so much, but the guy wears the headband. He wears the dashiki kind of shirts and the big pants and everything. So they're really playing.
The beard. He's got I never noticed if they show much from the waist down, but I'm sure he's wearing some capri pants or whatever they would have called them in the 80s. And
they're near bell bottoms. They're kind of.
Are they?
They're wide.
Probably some Birkenstocks to go with it. Yeah, Jinkos. That even better. And it's kind of funny because they look like they're a solid 20 years older than everyone else in this movie, of our main cast.
You bring it up. Rick, who is the main, he's Chris's boyfriend or love interest, I guess.
The counselor, not counselor, but the guy that's our kind of rapey guy.
He's like the farmhand kind of dude. He takes his shirt off a lot and he's got the flannel shirt on. He looks like he's clearly 10 years older than the rest of the cast. He looks very aged in comparison to these nubile young women.
Yeah, for sure. I do like that he's I could have been banging, Sally Fingerbanger or whatever her name was, Somehow that works. I don't think that would be the best pickup line, but
I never used that line, but I don't think it would have worked. I agree.
Yeah. So you get a lot of foreshadowing when they're going into where they're camping, and that's fine. This movie doesn't, one of the things you could arguably say is a fault of this movie, which I don't really think it is. It doesn't really hide from what it is. It's very much aware of the fact that we're making a slasher movie. We have a formula that we're going with, and we don't really stray from it all too much, aside from all the 3D antics. You kind of realize pretty quick, and I watched the trailer right before we did this, which I haven't seen in forever. They basically count down every dead body in the trailers. So, going into this, these are just the group of people that you're going to see get dead over the next hour and a half or so. And as soon as we get there, it's kind of the template is going forward for Friday the 13th movies. You get a group of young people, they show up, they start taking their clothes off and either finding bunks or jumping in the lake immediately or, something like that. It's summer vacation, spring break, whatever you want to call it. And, you get maybe 20 minutes of that. And then all of a sudden, Jason's like, what the fuck is going on? And he shows up and kind of throws everything off the rails. Right.
It is a very slow burn because we go quite a while, about, like you said earlier, about an hour before we actually start to see any killing. I mean, any kills.
Well,
we have a few kind of minor characters.
You see kills, but you see an hour before he's actually looking like Jason,
which I do enjoy. It kind of builds, it's a little bit different than the previous movies because it kind of builds this suspense, or that this, you signed up when you bought your ticket to this movie, you signed up for seeing this happen, and it takes a while to get there, but there is a lot of character development that happens because that kind of killing comes so fast and furious in that last 30 to 40 minutes.
Yeah, it does make these characters, for the most part, more like, even Shelly, who, again, it makes you kind of feel for him because he's not the inventor of the jump scare, but he, several times has these fake out jump scares on his crush or whatever she is in this movie. And, part of it, you're just kind of like, okay, that's kind of funny. We all have that guy that's, playing jokes or, doing tricks on their buddies. Maybe not to the extent that Shelly does, but
the guy's got a fake axe hatchet with a little bit of his own kind of hair texture built into it that he can put on his head to make it look like he's got a hatchet in his head. So yeah, I think he went a little bit above and beyond.
And he has a legitimate harpoon and wetsuit.
You bring up the harpoon. Is this the only instance that we see Jason use a bona fide projectile for a kill?
Does it count if you throw like an axe or a knife or something like that?
No, I mean something that is in the spirit of a gun.
It's the only one that comes to mind.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got like 140 kills throughout the whole franchise. So
it's no sleeping bag.
Right. No, and that was done 3 times, and that kill was done best in a dream sequence. So it wasn't even really a kill, but we're like 10 episodes away from that. So we got a ways to go for that one. So let's just kind of cut to it. So like we said, we go through this period where we see these kids, doing their thing. We have the
things.
typical young adult teenage thing. And then kids start fucking and kids start dying. That's really where this movie goes, and it executes well. So we start seeing some of, I'd say arguably my favorite kill of the entire franchise is in this movie, and we already touched on it a little bit, but we see some stuff like, you start with when you see Jason, he finds Shelly's harpoon gun, and you get what I can only assume would be a really like mind-blowing 3D effect in 1982. Now it looks a little like dated, but you get to watch a harpoon literally come right at your face and go through this chick's head and blow it out from the back. And again, it looks dated, but for someone who likes practical effects and someone who has a soft spot for 80 slashers, I mean, I'm not going to get up and cheer, but if I was going to find a movie to get up and cheer for, this is the kind of thing that we want.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that one in particular, or we want to kind of move forward?
No, I mean, it's a bit of a jump scare. It's not something that you're expecting, but he's holding the harpoon gun at the camera for so long, like he's almost bracing himself against the pole when he does it. And it's it's coming, the whole time that it's coming, but it's just so kind of, like I said, it's so off the, no pun intended, or inverted pun intended, it's off the mark for Jason, because it's the only instance I can think of like a crossbow, a gun, any kind of projectile other than something thrown that he uses in the whole thing. And it's just kind of out of character for Jason. So it's, even that aspect makes it a little bit kind of an oddity.
Yeah. So basically after that, we kind of move into the house and we start seeing, if I'm remembering the timeline right, actually, we skipped over the bikers.
Yeah.
So we should bring up the bikers real quick, because I wanted to bring them up later. So before this all happens, Shelly and girl who he's into, they go into town and they piss off some random bikers that are in this. I don't know if this is just a Midwest thing, but they're in like a party store, like a local type convenience store or something like that.
Yeah, like a gas station almost, but with liquor and groceries.
Yeah. In Michigan, we typically call it party stores. I don't know if that's a everywhere thing. These bikers are the weirdest mix of like biker punker type. I don't really know what you want to call them, and they're very
diverse,
cartoony. They are, but they're cartoony. They're growling. They're making weird gestures. They're like very curious about Shelly's condom that he has in his wallet, which he's like, do you use this? He's like, look at this guy. No, he doesn't use it, but that's what it's intended for, probably.
He's going to make water balloons. That's what that's for.
Yeah, exactly. I do kind of like how Shelly's response to when Ollie comes out, he's got his tall boy of beer, and Shelly is, for whatever reason, antagonizing him, backs into his bikes like a dickwad. And this guy is trying to stop his car by standing in front of it. He has like a football field worth of like road on either side of Ollie, but he decides to stop and just smile like a goober and get all his windows punched out, which again, probably a great 3D effect if you saw it in a theater in 1982. Watching it now, I'm like, what kind of glass is in this fucking car?
Yeah, this isn't tempered.
No, he goes through with like no issue at all. Anyway, so that leads to them getting away, and the bikers follow them back to where they're to Camp Crystal Lake, or where we're checking up for the night. So we get a couple bodies that drop before that, and frankly, they're kind of unimpressive kills for all 3 of them, really. They're very heavy on the 3D, except for Ollie, who just gets the shit beat out of him for a good...
He basically just gets bludgeoned.
Yeah.
And you expect that he's down for the count.
Right. And then you have Loco and Fox, who both get impaled with different pitchforks, and that's fine. Like, we're not really too worried about them. They're kind of shitty people, so you're like, yeah, well, shitty people gotta die. interesting because they come back later. This is why I find them interesting. So anyway, fast forward back to after all that shit. We're back in the house. We've got a few bodies under our bloodlust is going. Let's go see some TNA because it's Friday the 13th movie. And I got to say, the handstand kill, which we talked about, this movie does so much like legend building for the character of Jason. And the first time I saw this movie, like, do you ever sit back and see a kill and just hold yourself and be like, holy shit, that just happened? It's such a brutal, like, cut the way. So Andy he's, for whatever reason, he's walking on his hands because I guess that impresses, his girl or whatever.
That's some 1982 behavior.
Yeah.
I feel like that was a lot more prevalent back in the day.
And he does it several times before he finally gets told not to do that, very bluntly.
He gets told not to do that by Jason.
Right.
By the way.
The way it plays out is just, it's so perfect. Like he handstands out of the bathroom like a dingus, and you see him kind of walking, and he's upside down. So he looks up like towards the ceiling, and boom, there's Jason. And you just see him go full hand over his head straight down. And it looks like the most intense hack, like you're trying to split a oak tree with one slice of a machete. Is how hard he hits him. And the sound effect work is perfect. It's like they mic'd the floor so you would hear whatever they filled his body with make this really good thud. And you don't even really see the full aftermath of this until like 2 or 3 scenes later. But it's a great little like pop-up jump scare kill. And again, it's one of those, it's coming, but the way they do it is, again, to me, it's one of my favorite kills of the entire franchise.
I mean, it's brutal. It's definitely brutal. Like you said, you don't realize the full extent of it until a couple scenes later when you see Andy and he's split in half, and it's like
stuffed in the ceiling worse.
Yeah. You wonder because Debbie comes out of the shower. This is, and again, you kind of, again, alluded to it, but the TNA factor, this is the only part where there's really any nudity. Debbie is the only woman that you see with any kind of nudity. She leaves the bathroom and doesn't see any of the aftermath of this until she does. So it's very brutal and very, very swift.
It's a cool reveal, though, when she does see it. I mean, there's a little bit of early fan service because she's saying they're reading a Fangoria magazine, and I'm sure anyone who's listening to this episode has a little bit of a soft spot for Fangoria because it's what we had back then. And all of a sudden this little bit of blood starts dripping on her. She looks up and sees his body cut in half, intestines everywhere, and then that's where you get the little either stealing, homage, whatever you want to call it. It's very reminiscent of the Kevin Bacon death from the first movie, except instead of an arrow, it's straight up machete through the chest. And they do a pretty good job with the effect because you see it pull her, obviously it's a prosthetic, but you see it push her skin and kind of it's not nearly as effective as the kill. He must have dulled it cutting Andy in half, but it's an effective effect, and it just works really, really well.
So once Debbie meets her end, then we start to kind of move on to the hippies. And it almost seemed, when I watched this, it almost seemed like they were in a separate cabin, almost. The two hippies, yeah. Chili and I can never remember what the hippie guy's
Chuck.
Name is, but Chuck. Okay, Chili and Chuck. Why not? The power goes out or it flickers out or whatever. So Chuck goes downstairs to check what's going on. And Jason's down there. He gets, I don't know, very unceremoniously taken care of. He just gets zapped into the fuse box or whatever. So the rest of the movie, the power is pretty much out in the main cabin. And that's when Chili meets up with a deceased Shelley. And Shelley's known for being this trickster throughout the whole movie. So she doesn't take it seriously at all.
Yeah. I think the biggest problem with Shelley's death is it's just so unceremonious.
Yeah, like, very unceremonious.
You almost, again, I don't know what, like, I'm not a creator of film, obviously. I don't know what you do to like give Shelley a proper death, but have Jason throw him through a window with an axe that was in his head that he started with, or one that's similar to it, or something, more than the stereotypical like because his throat's been cut and then he just falls out in the kitchen. It's not great. Like the sound effect. It's pretty much it.
That's how I'd handle it.
Yeah. So after Shelley's, got his death finally, or eventually, it took forever. Basically, Shelley kind of gets an unceremonious death too, but it's very much so playing into the 3D thing. She just kind of turns around and gets a hot poker to the gut, essentially. Or was it to the back? Either way, it goes through her, and you see the poker actually go through her.
And that's in a way a bit of a off screen too, because while she's on screen, you just see her reaction. I think this movie has a lot of really good acting in it, considering like what kind of movie it is, and the actors that you really haven't seen much after or before. But I would say Chili's death is probably one of the most overacted of the series, because it's kind of like, it's very drawn out, and it's like, can we do take two, maybe a take four, take that out of all this stuff.
I hope all our sound effects make it to this episode. Yeah, there we go, more farts. So basically, once Chili's dead, we're essentially in the third act of this movie. I mean, once this movie ramps up, it goes. It doesn't really, once these main characters that start in the van on the way there start dying, we're in like third gear, and we're on the highway and cruising to a very fun climactic ending.
To use another driving analogy, we are downhill from here.
We are also downhill, yes, in third gear without gas. Okay, we get back to the cabin. We are now with Chris and Rick, and Chris goes in. She starts looking around. This is kind of a trope of the Friday the 13th series. She kind of walks through the house. She's like, hey, where are you guys? Blah, blah, blah. Starts walking around, starts realizing all of a sudden Jason has had some time to clean up. He stuffed bodies in random places, and she eventually finds one or two of them. She screams like a moron. Jason knows where she is, and he's like, hey, something's home, better go fuck him up. And he does. He grabs Rick first, and he gets one of the more memorable deaths. I think it's one of the more cheesy deaths in the franchise, honestly, but it is memorable because of what he does. You get a really cool shot where Chris comes outside first because she's looking for Rick. And you're looking, basically the door is right at the corner of the cabin. She's outside and she's looking around. It's dark at this point, so it's not as easy to see everything. And Rick is just around the corner, but Jason's got him. So Jason is like hulking over him. I mean, he makes Rick, and you find out later that he's on a step, but he looks like he is just a silverback gorilla in a hockey mask, just like holding Rick down so he can't move or scream or anything. And she goes back inside because she doesn't think he's out there, apparently. And you just see Jason pick him up by his skull, squeeze, and pop out an eyeball, crushing his skull, and his body just goes limp like a rag doll. It's an interesting effect because, again, it's 100% just totally leaning into the 3D. You can see the wires or the hole that comes out. It's very... If you go to Spirit Halloween... this is coming out in October. So if you go to Spirit Halloween, you'll probably find a head that does something similar where it pops out an eye and goes blah, 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 blah. Whatever. I made another sound effect.
Another sound effect, yeah. For the real.
Yeah. But I would bet that if you were to poll people who've watched this whole franchise, this death probably comes up a lot as one that's more memorable.
So another first, and you're the resident expert of the series. Is this the only time that you can think of off the top of your head where Jason holds someone so that they can't alert another victim? Because in my mind, what Jason does basically is he's just a killing machine. It doesn't matter who it is, where it is, what it is. He's just like singular focused on killing everything. And this specific kill seems out of character, again, with the harpoon, because he holds him while Chris comes out to look for Rick. She's like, Rick, are you out here? Whatever she says. And Jason's basically muzzling him so he can't make any noise. And it just seems kind of really out of character, especially if this just being a 3-movie series so far. There has been nothing where it's been like, don't alert the other characters in the movie.
Yeah, I don't think so. But there's another interesting part that's kind of right after this that's also very out of character, that it kind of makes it play like they were trying to take Jason into a more human character, because he also feels pain in this movie. He makes noises in this movie.
Well, same with 2. 2, he does the same. There's a few where there's injuries that happen to him. He gets hit with the machete, or the beginning of the movie of this movie begins with the end of part 2, but it's a little bit of a different configuration than how part 2 ends.
Yeah, but it's different in this one. Like when he's I'm not trying to dodge your question. No, yeah. I can't think of another thing where he's trying to conceal what he's doing like that. But I mean, he kind of chases that by going in. He's going after Chris. Yes, Chris. Shows you how much I care about these characters outside of Shelly. I don't remember any of their fucking names. So he goes in to go after Chris, and Chris pretty quickly realizes that he doesn't go in right away. First, Chris goes back in the house. Rick is dead. That's fine. we have like the haunted house windstorm going on where every door and every window in the fucking house is opening and closing randomly. And if you know anything about Jason Voorhees, you're in a room with a lot of windows. Jason doesn't fucking like windows. Someone's going through that window. And they build it up actually pretty well because again, you bought a ticket, you know what's coming. They probably go a solid like 40 seconds before they finally like hurl Rick's dead ass through the window. But when they do, it pays off really well because you get a really good shot of Jason finally appearing. It's dark, but he's well lit and he just looks menacing as fuck. And at that point, Chris knows, like, I better run. She goes upstairs and she starts kind of barricading herself in and getting ready to fight back. And she knifes him a couple times, first in the hand, and you actually hear him make an audible noise, which I don't remember. I mean, he might have made a little bit of a grunt, but not like this. He almost says owie, 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 and like backs off for a second. You know, she goes through the door and she starts kind of hacking at him with this butcher knife. It's like something like that. And he's actually on the defense for a second. He's making noises, he's hurting. And she ends up hitting him in the knee. And again, he spends a solid 20 seconds like owie, 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 ooh, ooh, ee. And then, you know, kind of gets back to work. But it's another character change for Jason that really never comes back up in any other point in this movie.
Yeah, he definitely shakes it off because that seems to wound him for a bit, but he's chasing Chris after that scene through the woods and he's like full out, you know, running down hills and uneven ground, and it's as if it doesn't affect him. But at the time, like you said, she's backing him down with the knife, yep, like swiping it at him, and he's like backing up. Whereas I think forward in the series, he's impervious. He's just the unstoppable force after this point.
You know, if you really want to like nerd out and read fan theories, which I don't, but I've seen them because I'm terrible.
Because you're that nerd, but you're not that much of a nerd. I can respect that.
No, you know, I spend a lot of time in front of the computer at work, and sometimes you see a title and you're like, yeah, let's read this because I'm sure I'm going to agree with this. I've seen people say like, oh, he just didn't have full power yet. I'm like, because he's like a mini boss Goku. At this point. He's
like Goku from Dragon Ball Z. He needs to charge up.
Yeah, well, and that's essentially the argument that I've heard. I just think that the simple answer is this is just how they wrote the character in this movie. Get the fuck over it. It's
at this point in time, this is what he was. He was not quite the monolithic character that he becomes. Yeah, the man machine.
Well, I mean, if you really want to like split hairs, by the 6th movie, which he's not even in the 5th movie, he's a fucking zombie, so he shouldn't feel anything. So anyway, like you mentioned, the chase is on at this point. She decides to go out a fucking window for whatever reason. Jason's chasing her. And this is where the bikers start popping back up. And the reason I really like when the bikers start popping up, so Chris starts running back to the barn, and you see the first of them. You see Loco, who apparently was strung up by his boots or something. And he just drops from out of fucking nowhere and lands like, he doesn't land on the ground, but he's like hanging in front of her face. And she screams. But I was like, she has no idea who these people are. She's got to be thinking, as she's running away from Jason, who the fuck was that? That just, you know, fell in front of me. She goes into the barn and finds another body in Fox, and she doesn't drop or anything. But again, there's now 2 corpses that she's found that no fucking clue where these people came from, and they're just dead punkers hanging out or whatever. Ollie comes up in a little bit here, but it's kind of almost weirdly comical how she responds to them, but still has that whole like fight or flight mentality at this point because, well, you can't stop and investigate, right?
And I also find it interesting that there's this whole backstory with Chris about the whole, like, she passed out, she saw, we assume it's Jason, that's how it's presented in the flashback.
Yeah.
And possibly sexually assaulted by this person. I mean, it's not really said by those specific words. Yeah, but it's very much implied that Jason is the person that does this. And she's, you know, this is her house. This is her parents' house. But she doesn't have any place in the woods that she can go to kind of get away, like hiding spots, you know, little places that you can go. Like, my kids are not, well, I have a teenager and a sub-teenager, right? A preteen. They have places in this house they can hide. If they want to get away from me, who will be playing Jason, depending on the act that's been, you know, performed in this house, that I get that enraged. Chris doesn't have any of that stuff. She's just like, I don't know where the hell I am. I've never been here before. I mean, it's almost to that level where she's just totally clueless to her environment.
Yeah, it is kind of weird. I know, I mean, now that I ever had Jason chasing me per se, but she hides
in a room with no windows. and only one way out, aka the door, and running through. She only knows the path directly back to the house. There's no hidey hole or anything other than the wood pile that she utilizes as a log.
It's interesting you said that. Like when I was growing up as a kid, much younger than what's portrayed in this movie, my grandparents had a cabin that was out in the woods and whatnot. And, we Irish Catholic family, we had like 50 cousins and all that shit. And we all had hiding spots and all that stuff in the woods that were around it. And, you're right. Kind of thinking about that's kind of a human nature thing. Like if you're young and you grow up in a place like that, you go wander, you find stuff that, a fort, who knows, maybe you find a trailer shack that has a severed head in it, whatever. But you're right. She is kind of tunnel vision through the whole movie more than you would think if she's got a pre-existing knowledge of this property. But I guess that's movie magic, right?
Sure. Wouldn't be a story without a little bit of ignorance, I guess.
You're right. So we get back to the barn, and this is where we start kind of wrapping up on the story or getting ratcheting towards the end of this story. And like I said, bodies are falling out of the sky essentially, and Jason chases her, and it's almost like this weird little cat and mouse hide and seek game.
Yeah,
that's fine. Jason's in there. He's kind of he locks the door so she can't get out through the door. He's kind of tossing the place, throwing hay and a random footlocker and whatever he can find in there, trying to find her. She's gone to the second level of this barn, and he makes his way up there, and you see a little bit of a fight between them, but she hits him in the back, that clogs him with a shovel, which puts him down for 20, 30 seconds, long enough for her to wrap a rope around his neck and make a makeshift noose essentially, and kick him out I don't know what you would call that window. I'm sure there's a term for it in barns, but essentially it's a big window.
We are not barn experts, just for the record.
Oh yeah, clearly. She pushes him out of that, and you get actually a really good camera shot of obviously a dummy being lynched. Like it looks legitimate though. Like it's well shot, and we're led to unless you've seen a slasher movie before, we're led to think this is the end of the movie.
Any normal human character, this would be the end of their existence.
But this is a slasher movie, so we know there's at least 2 more endings coming. So she's in there and she's a little hysterical. She's crying, whatever. She makes her way back down there. They spend more time trying to open the door than I thought was necessary, but whatever. Open the door, and of course, there's Jason looking kind of like an action figure in the noose. And what do you know? He gets up, and what I like about this,
unhangs himself.
Well, that's what I like about it. Instead of just grabbing for her right away, he gets up, he pulls himself up,
making eye contact the entire time to show his dominance.
Takes the mask off. Yeah, like he fucks with her. It's kind of an interesting play. Yeah. So he gets out of the noose, and here's Ollie to save the day. That's not Ollie's not saving anything. Like he comes back like he's gonna
back from the dead
her.
Basically.
And within like 2 seconds, Jason hacks his hand off, and that's what kills him, apparently. It's kind of funny because you get a pretty good facial like reaction from Ollie. The look on his face, it's pretty fucked up. But that's long enough for Jason to get distracted, and Chris produces an axe. And this is where, of all the things that have changed in Jason's appearance throughout the years, movie to movie, outfit to outfit, sometimes getting shot into fucking space or getting sent to hell, the one thing he always seems to have is the fucking axe mark from when Chris just clocks him right in the fucking head and doesn't put him down, because he of course continues to like go after her with an axe in his head until he doesn't. Again, this is another thing that this movie does that just builds so much on the lore and what we know of this character. And that's one of the things, arguably more than anything, that aside from the mask itself, that has just been a part of every single Jason movie past this. I think it's not in the remake. Anyway, so yeah, it's a pretty cool quote unquote death for Jason in this one. He lies down, takes a nap for a while, and then we do the shit that happens in, thankfully this is the last movie that it happens in, but we have to do another fucking dream sequence because why not?
It wouldn't be Friday the 13th so far without it. But we get a twist. We don't get Jason that comes up.
Yeah, so there's like almost arguably 2 different dream sequences that happen.
It's like 2 different pieces of this same dream.
Right. Spoilers if you haven't had this movie spoiled already. The first thing we see that happens is, again, it's very homage to the first movie with Alice, I think is her name in the first movie. She gets in the canoe and she's just gonna go take a nap in the middle of the lake until sunlight, I guess. And it's pretty much what happens. And this time, instead of Jason popping out of the water as a kid, which what's a much, much more effective scare, Jason's mom pops out of the water with a body that looks very rigor mortis, I guess. Is that a word? She got very stiff arms. She's got like mummy arms she's a mommy.
I'm leaving that in.
That's fine. I don't know. I don't really like how she looks in this. Like, she looks like they made a mask out of
Paper
clay
mache
and
and a lot of
left
water.
it underwater for 2 hours and said, it's good enough. Just put like a gummy worm on it and call it a day, you know?
It's almost Medusa-esque. She's got a couple snakes coming out of the face, and it just tonally doesn't really match the rest of the movie.
No, and for a movie that, again, it kind of embraces some of the campiness and all that stuff, it looks like they said, what can we do with our last $200 and kind of make this a shot that we don't really need? So that happens, and that's okay, fine, whatever. But then we wake up in the boat again, and I think this would be a better ending. There's only 2 endings of the 3 in this that you could have. I think this would be a better ending, where she wakes up and she's looking around and it's all kind of quiet and whatnot. She looks over to the house and she does like a double take, and we go back to a window on the house and you see movement in the house. You see this bald, bloody kind of pig face. It's like Man Bear Pig from South Park is up there. Basically, Jason is in the house. He's bloody. He looks like he's taking an axe to the face, and he kind of points at her and says, you, essentially, and he presumably runs downstairs. I don't remember. I think he like kicks open the front door and it essentially goes after her, and she wakes up again. This is where I would have cut the movie. I would have basically let him run at her, get to about the water, and just kind of cut to black and let it leave there. You know, roll credits. And then we have one more ending where she wakes up again. And this time the cops are there. You kind of see not all the destruction, but you essentially see the barn again, where Jason's laying there with the axe in his head and he's presumed to be dead. And the cops take her away and she's hysterical. She's screaming and laughing at the same time, and the cops are essentially saying, well, maybe we shouldn't have opened camp, like allowed people to stay at this camp less than 24 hours after this other mass murder where we didn't find the killer. And well, no, fuck it, let's go get a coffee and
some donuts.
That's where we kind of some donuts, and then we kind of just get like a very still shot of a very dirty lake.
Well, we get Jason too laying there. It's like a pan or it's a zooming shot of Jason. Mm-hmm. And you almost kind of expect, knowing what we know now, obviously 20, 30 years removed, 40 years removed at this point, you kind of expect him to twitch or do something to move, but he really does. He doesn't. He lays there very still, and then it fades out. And it's like, what's to come. The thing watching it now is that all the lore, all the legend of Jason, but at the time of this movie, it's very much presented as if this is the end. There's no more. Jason is what he is, and it's over. But of course, hindsight being 2020, we know we have another 40 years of this character to come.
The next movie is called The Final Chapter.
Right.
That was clearly the final movie that they. So yeah, that in a nutshell is Friday the 13th Part 3D. Let's fire up the grill. We're camping. Let's get some hot dogs. So You want to go first?
Yeah, I can do it first.
All right.
What I like about Part 3 is that the whole thing, it just, as we mentioned throughout this entire episode, it feels so much less serious than the first 2 movies have been. They take themselves really seriously. This one's a little bit more campy, even though it doesn't take place at a camp. And I think the 3D element helps add to that, because how serious can you take a 3D movie where we said around 30 times they're poking things at you, you're looking at it and there's just these elements coming out of the screen. You kind of have to go into it understanding that it's not going to be super serious. We get to see Jason get his mask. He becomes that iconic character. We get to see Jason do things that he's really never done before or since. He muzzles a victim. We get to see him use a projectile, stuff like that. He is just buff as fuck. And Part 3 brings us the best theme song of the entire series, maybe of every horror movie ever. Just for those factors alone, I have to give Friday the 13th Part 3 7 poppin' eyeballs out of 11 hot dogs. This is honestly probably one of my favorite of the entire series.
So yeah, I agree with everything you just said. Like I have no argument there. For me, this is, of all the 12 films that we have to date, there's second only to one other film, which will be the next one we talk about. Spoiler, but you'll probably forget that by the time we get to that. This is the movie that I go back to the most out of the franchise, though. This is the one that, like, I don't really know what I want to watch. I know I want to watch a horror movie. I don't really want to overthink it. This one is a fun one to turn on. Like, as soon as I hear that theme song pumping, I'm like, I'm in. Like, I'm sold. Let's have some fun. Let's see Jason fuck these people up. It's goofy, it's silly, but it's still exceptionally over the top violent. It's gory. It checks all the boxes, and more importantly, Ricard Brooker is an awesome Jason. He has built so much into this franchise that still is what we look back on with it. Again, you'll always hear like the one-off person is, I really like Sackhead Jason, or I really like Pamela, or whatever, and that's fine. Like, I'm not arguing that, but I think if you were to ask just man on the street, if you were to go ask 100 people what does Jason look like, this is what they're thinking of, is this movie in one way or another. So yeah, it just hits. It's not a perfect movie. There's plenty of things you could pick apart if you really wanted to, but you'd be hard pressed to find a slasher movie in general that is just more enjoyable to just kind of put on and have fun with. So it's a solid 8.5, like, three-dimensional hot dogs out of 10 for me. Like I said, I thoroughly love this one, and getting to watch it again, I like having a reason to watch it, but I'll do it anyway. It's too easy to go back to for me.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to going back to watching 4, because it's been so long since I've seen it, and it's just kind of cool that we know what's kind of come up next. And I think probably 4 is it holds a special place in my heart, and I know it obviously does for you. It just has all these elements to it because they totally play it up to be this final thing. Just like they played 3 to be this final thing, but 4 just has even more to come. So it's kind of exciting that we've seen 3, and 3 has been so good, especially considering, 1 was really good, 2 was good. Sure. 3 is like another high watermark. 4 comes up. I think it's another super high watermark. So lifts all boats, right?
Well, yeah, and I'm not going to sit here and act like this, those tides go down too. But
yeah, it's
they
true.
Haven't yet.
That's true.
They haven't yet. And, this movie and the first 4 of these movies, like, I don't want to say I wish they would have stopped at part 4, because there's so many good things I like about the movies that come after that too. But the first 4 really feel like, what would you call that? A quadrilogy or something like that? They almost feel like,
if we go by the Alien example, it's a quadrilogy.
Yeah, they really feel like, if you take continuity out of it, which is dumb, they feel like a really good, like, just, you want a one day or one night binge to go through. That's a really good 4 movie run, just keeping the same universe with the same non-existent rules and kind of have some fun with it. And they all have a distinct tone that just works really well for each individual film, where I do think
they definitely feel like their own chapters. Each one feels like, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, and then that's one book, and then we move on to the second set of books.
Yeah, and I don't think that's the same with the second set of books, and that's a whole different conversation for a different day. But so far, this series, again, I don't think it's hard to see why not just myself, but so many people have such a love for this franchise. So that has been Friday the 13th, part 3 in 3D. Thank you for listening to that. So we will be back at our normal time on Tuesday morning. So this is a one-off. If you haven't figured out by yet, we will be dropping one of these on every Friday the 13th until we run out of Friday the 13th. And maybe we'll do one on Saturday the 14th, because there is a Saturday the 14th movie. We'll see. Anyway, in the meantime, if you want to keep up on that, if you want to follow us and do our normal shenanigans like question of the week and whatever else we got going on, you can do that all over the place. Our website is at crap.town. And then you can also follow us on social media at DookiePodMonster on X, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Slasher, etc., etc. We'd also really appreciate it if you subscribe to our YouTube page. We're trying to do more stuff there, and give us feedback on those. Let us know what you want to see, be it video or otherwise. And Sean, tell us some other stuff. What am I forgetting or not saying?
I was just going to say, if you like this episode, go back. We did 2 other episodes for Friday the 13th Part 1 and Friday the 13th Part 2. Obviously, all going out on Friday the 13th whenever those occur. Other than that, you can check us out at youtube.shit. Not youtube.shit. You can check me out.
It might be.
It could be at this point. You can check me out at youtube.drafttherapy.com. I cover Michigan beer. I haven't done it in a while, but that's what the channel is mostly about. Other than that, you can check me out on all social media at Draft Therapy.
And that's it. So cue up the awesome music, which is going to be intro and outro, because why not? We will talk to you on next week. Cheers. Side note, you want to know why you can cut this out because it won't be at all relevant by the time this comes out. The only reason I know his name is Chuck is I responded to someone where the question was, what character are you from a horror movie? Like, who do you see yourself as?
Mm-hmm.
I responded with him. Sitting on the toilet smoking weed.